Morning. I'm Carl Moore. I'm here at the Dixon Gallery and Gardens. This is December 30th, and I'm here to talk to you about my current show, Portraits and Figures, in the Würzburg Gallery. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks, Carl. We're very glad to have you and your work here. I wanted to know a couple of things about you. First, when you were a child, did you grow up wanting to be an artist?
When I grew up in Kent, Mississippi, and I can say I wanted to be an artist in a sense that I spent a good number of years in and out of the hospital with a kidney disease, and my exposure to art came from my two sisters and brother, who all took art classes and all seemed to be very good at it, but went on to other careers in their life. But I kind of stuck with that because when you're at a young age and you're going in and out of hospitals at a hospital, it was early late 60s, 70s, and you needed something to do. So I'd already had an interest in art, and I started drawing and found out I could do it, and I started painting and found out I could do it, and I love doing it. So interesting growing up in a household, especially one would think in a small town in Mississippi, Canton, which I'm very proud to be from there. I'm proud to be from Mississippi. That my parents were completely okay with the idea and very supportive of the idea that I wanted to go into art.
Did you go to art school?
Yeah, in 1982, my sister found out there was a program in Chicago, which is where she lived at the time, as the Art Institute, and they had this summer program that you could go and get college credit. So she signed me up, and I went to Chicago for a semester, and that's kind of was a good experience. I came back, finished out my senior year, and applied to what was then the Memphis Academy of Arts, Memphis College of Arts now. Went on to get my BFA and then later my MFA from the Memphis College of Arts.
Do you have the same style as you did when you first started? Do you work in the same style?
How do I work it? Well, I guess in reference to my work, it's changed over the years, and the funny thing that happened was I had this kind of style when I first started out painting, my teen years and my 20s before college, and it's kind of relevant to the style I'm working in now, because in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, all of who we consider to be these legends, I guess, in art, such as Warhol and a lot of other artists I can go through and name names. Remember, they were current then. They were in their careers. So any magazine, there was no internet, in reference to now. Any magazines or any reference that I found at that time were magazines that my sisters would bring me from college. Art school in the 80s, from my experience, was all about how well you can make something look real. So going in as a graphic designer and an illustrator and a painter, a lot of my work was realism, and I came out doing these super realistic paintings and illustrations, but over time I found myself wanting to get away from that and get to something more contemporary and something that I could do continuously and love doing, but allow me to make all the statements I want. So the relevance of that is I went back to kind of a style that I did early in my career with more education behind it, a lot more training, and I modified it into kind of what I'm working on now and kind of how I work now.
How do you choose your color palette? What makes you choose the colors you use?
My color palette, I would think, is a little subdued. I take colors and I kind of dull them down. That's because I want the color to play a part in the piece, the background, kind of to pull it together. I wanted to have some sense of atmosphere. And there are a few paintings when I do work. I try to maintain that pop, that vibrancy, that original. But every color, when I'm mixing, always gets mixed with something. There's a variation in the work. It's a variation. The color plays a part in the mood of the subject, plays a part in the atmosphere, and it plays a big part in the overall concept of the work.
Do you have an idea of where your art might move in the future?
Yeah, each series I'm always trying to do something a little bit different. As of late, I've been dealing with the color black in relation to the color, in relation to society's concept and ideology and misconception of the color black. And I try to associate it with it as a culture and how that transcends historically to the use of black in general. And I did a series last year that I'm going to be still working with, but the goal was to not let the viewer pretty much pay attention to the color black, even though it's clearly part of the character, but more or less to the situation that the character is in. And after experimenting, I did quite a few of these paintings, and I find that people gravitate more to what's going on in the scene more than the character themselves, in which I can say those paintings are successful. But you always want to take it to another level. My work in the future is still going toward kind of a social, but it's more going toward the social aspect of individuality. I've been, since the Portraits and Figures show, I've started on a series of sketches and paintings that kind of are going to be an extension of my last 3 shows, dealing with individuality, dealing with people and how they live and how we work in our own environment. So the colors will probably change a little bit. How I draw my images are going to change a little bit, but it's just going to change back to something I did previous that I thought was very successful. The Potato Farmer started out as kind of one of the transition pieces. This is what I started out. This kind of like bridged the gap between me from realism to kind of how I work now. There were some variations in my process of painting, and this particular piece kind of had a lot of personal overtones when I was working on it. It was the only piece that I can honestly say that took 2 years to complete, not because of the complexity of it, but mainly trying to establish what kind of voice I wanted to have with it. There was a kind of a systematic process and while working on this piece, and I wanted to be very literal toward the image, but I wanted it to be very simple. I was so entrenched in creating the pencil line, so that's kind of where the idea of the outlines came from, because I think one of my strongest suits was when I went to college and coming out of a small town was the fact that I really felt I knew how to draw and I was comfortable with it. So accomplishing this, and when I moved to painting, I felt like I was always missing the lines that I drew before I started painting. So I came up with this system of I wanted these outlines to represent the pencil line, but it ended up turning into something a little bit more. I felt something a little bit more important in doing this super realistic painting was gravitated toward kind of conceiving how I wanted to use color and how I wanted color to be the dominant part of the work, but at the same time give you an idea of what the image was saying, what the environment was saying, what the overall statement was. So developing a process of using color, tones, and value became more important than just the idea of creating the work, but making the color work with the environment, work with the character, work with the situation as a whole. So that became, this particular piece kind of bridged that gap and led me to my series and body of work that I create now. Waiting for Jesus is one of my pieces that I consider to be more of where my work is now. Coming from the potato farmer, which had a process of layering color to create shadow, to create highlights. Where I'm pretty much working now is primarily focus on the expression of the painting and the expression of the character. Waiting for Jesus is a symbolic piece it's more of a social idea of what someone is waiting for, why are they waiting for this, and that whole act and that exchange with the viewer kind of gives you that whole idea. The viewer is kind of asking the same question. Well, waiting for Jesus, what is she waiting for, and who is Jesus? Right now I'm trying to, in this piece, I'm delving more into the statement of the piece more than the process. In comparison to the potato farm, I'm not so much concerned with layers of color, but I am concerned with the composition of the piece itself and the composition of the character. So that's more important here, or it's just a different area where I'm working now, where I'm more focused on the statement than the process. Shutdown kind of has the same idea as Waiting for Jesus, but the work is more or less talking more about an action or something taking place. The colors are a little bit more vibrant to emphasize the emergency of what's taking place. Shutdown is kind of synonymous of just something ending, and this particular piece represents that. And I wanted to take a more simplistic view and use very simplistic objects of a hand, a person with a lunch bag, and going to approaching what appears to be a padlock. So with the lunch bag being a reference to work and the padlock being a reference to something that cannot be entered, then the idea of shutdown is more, the idea is clearer. Again, from the reference work of the potato farmer, where it was about process, even though the image and the atmosphere were very important about the message. Shutdown is a very simplistic view, more direct, and has kind of an overtone of kind of a contemporary pop feel about it.